All right, there we go. Now we are recording. We'll jump in and do some introductions and then spend the rest of the time going through different processes for sustainability action plans at different firms. And we'll be answering some questions. We can use the Q&A or the chat to answer or ask and answer questions. But let me jump into some introductions and we can get started. Okay. All right, so I am not up here on screen, but I am Melanie DeCola. I am AIA's Director of Climate Action Pledge Program. So that is the 2030 commitment and the materials pledge, both of those, and help lead our working groups, including putting together a sustainability action plan resource, which is the focus of today's session. And we'll get into that in a second. But Ashley, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Ashley Mulhall. I lead sustainability for Grace Design Studios, formerly known as Orchid Winslow.
Dan?
Hey everybody, I'm Dan Overby, Associate Principal with Browning Day in Indianapolis.
And Kate.
Hey there, Kate Sector with Lake Flato Architects. I'm the Design Performance Manager based out of San Antonio, Texas.
Great, thanks so much. And also, I was just going to mention we have Ellie in the background as well as AIA staff, and we'll be helping with logistics. So let's get started. Here are some of our learning objectives. As mentioned, we recently completed a sustainability action plan refresh of our guide. And we also have a materials action plan, and we'll be doing some education around that in September. But we are going to go through what is in that guide, as well as a little bit of the background, and then spend the bulk of the time talking about how different firms have used their plan in practice. And I don't know why that deadline to apply June 16th is on there. That's not applicable. So if you have your phone, you can use this QR code to go and learn more about the 2030 commitment. This should take you to the landing page. If you don't know about it or are not a signatory, go and check that out. And then this code will take you straight to the landing page for the Sustainability Action Plan, which also has a link to the Materials Action Plan at the same place. You can download them both. But if you get a chance, go ahead and check that out. You can also just Google AIA Sustainability Action Plan, and it'll probably come up. There's only one main document for this. So Ashley, I thought I'd turn it over to you here to give a little bit of the history and overview, the first version of the plan, and then going into what we what we did in the refresh. And I can give you control of the screen from here, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
This Sustainability Action Plan guidance document, we had a first edition that was released maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I don't exactly remember the timing, but the 2030 working group, recognized that one of the most challenging parts of the requirements for 2030 was for firms to create a sustainability action plan. And while, they're publicly posted and everyone can access a lot of examples of sustainability action plans, we felt it was important to create a document that could help assist firms in that process and really outline sort of what they should contain. So this happened, roughly 6 years ago, and then just this summer, a version 2 was released. I'm going to go into a little bit of, what's in the document, but a lot of what went into this refresh was a focus on small firms. So we recognized again that a lot of this was sort of organized around a larger firm, and that small firms felt it was a little overwhelming. So we went back with a small firm lens this last time and really tried to give guidance that could be relevant to any size firm, including small firms. Let's see if I can. see. Sorry, I can't move the slide, Melanie. Let me see here. If I can make it. There we go. Okay. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to some of the aspects. This is essentially a table of contents of what's in the Sustainability Action Plan guidance document. Company commitment, really outlining that. And what's great about this document is that it gives you really step-by-step actions to go through, questions to ask yourselves. So it's not just you need a commitment, provide one. It's how do you develop that commitment? Who do you need to talk to? It's very much a step-by-step. And I'm going to go through that a little bit when I go through one of our more recent sustainability action plans, because the last round we did really use the SAP guidance document to develop. So next is design and approach, spelling out milestones, goal setting. How are you going to dictate that process? Governance and reporting. Who's going to track data? What data are you going to track? When will it be collected? How is it reported? Getting into those details. Internal training and education, which is a vital part of not just creating a plan, but executing it over time. Outreach, advocacy, external knowledge sharing, and then operations and outlook. Sorry, I can't. There we go. I think it'll work now. Okay. So this is a deep dive into one of the sections on really organizing your firm and how sustainability is organized in a firm. So this is an example of some of the ways to organize around sustainability, and not just sustainability, but other aspects of the firm. So I'll tell you that when we went through this process, and we used the SAP guidance document, we realized when we were done that there were a lot of aspects of our firm that we could organize in the same way, not just sustainability, but going through and sort of understanding how we were organized and how we should be organized was really valuable. And, this is just an example of, some of the direction that's being given to small firms. It's important, that each person understands how to integrate sustainability. And then, some guidance for larger firms. So now I'm going to get into our sustainability action plan process. So here's a timeline of, again, we were formerly Orchid Winslow. We just changed names to Grace Design Studios this summer. So a lot of this timeline is working as Orchid Winslow. But we signed on to the 2030 commitment in 2009. We didn't really start reporting until 2011. That was our first year. It took us a while to sort of understand what we needed to do and get a team rallied around it. But we created our first sustainability action plan in 2012. And what that really helped us do was just kickstart and jumpstart our sustainability development as a firm. So really before that action, we weren't doing a whole lot internally. We had a green team, who was sort of leading lead projects and doing fun things like Earth Week. But in terms of process and how we design buildings, it wasn't really that organized as a firm. Each studio and team was kind of doing their own thing. So it was really great to rally around that and say, how are we going to organize ourselves? And then I'll get into what that document looked like in a sec, but it kind of sat on a shelf. We finished that document. Hooray, we're done. Let's sort of figure out who we need to be and what we need to do. It did set us off on a good rally, but in terms of referencing back that document, it kind of sat on the shelf. So, 2030 commitment sort of came out, around 2020 and said, hey, if you're a firm that's signed on, we have this new requirement where every 5 years we want you to update your sustainability action plan, which is actually very good. It's good that it's not sitting on a shelf, just sort of dying. No one's looking at it, that it's something you're actively going to look at least every 5 years. So our second version we did right after the SAP guidance document came out, and it was really helpful And it looked a lot different. So I'm going to get into that. And then at this point, we are, as Grace Design is a firm of now around 500 people, we're relooking at that action plan because it needs to be a lot different for a firm of that scale. Oops, 2 slides. So here's what our first one looked like. It was very focused on operations and sort of all the green things we were doing as a firm, but not really diving that much into process. And part of that was I didn't really understand what we needed to do for a process. So part of what we were saying is we need a process. So we kind of started down that road of looking at integrative design and how we might incorporate that. But it was very much, you know, this beautiful document, which these are just some screen captures of, that sat on a shelf as I got to work. This is an example of our refresh. So this is about 5 years old at this point. And we really started to deep dive, and it became much less of a marketing tool and much more of a process tool. You know, we really went through each section of the guidance document and asked ourselves all the questions very methodically, and, you know, had a group of sort of a diverse group from the firm to help come up with this document, whereas before it was kind of me in a vacuum just designing it. So, and a lot of that is outlined in the SAP guidance document to really say, hey, don't do this in a vacuum, really get leadership involved, people from sort of all aspects of the firm, because it really does make a difference in the content and how you execute it going forward. We got into design and process. So again, very much an in-depth, you know, how are you going to adjust the process? You know, what's going to work for you? And this is where we started to get into how is our firm organized? You know, what process do we need? And I can tell you this was definitely a journey. You know, it started off sort of very rigid based on experience from a small group of people. But as we started to try to roll it out, we've recognized that different studios and different teams were working differently. And a lot of that was due to the project type. So a very sort of rigorous process that starts in concept design what works very well for our education studio, because, you know, they win a job and they start design. Our healthcare studio, you know, a lot of the proposals that we were putting together, you basically had to submit a schematic design as the part of the proposal. So a lot of that front end design work was happening a lot earlier, and we didn't recognize that until we really, you know, started diving into this SAP guidance document and really looking with a deep lens at our process and how it was working and why certain things weren't working. So it was very helpful for us to understand ourselves and how we were working across the firm and what we might need to do to make this accessible. Okay, so getting into structure. So our, you know, the way we were working was kind of a hybrid with a central team and then dispersed among different studios. So this is sort of how we ended up. Now that, you know, at the time of this was created, we were roughly 100 people. And since then we've grown exponentially. First, you know, acquiring a couple of firms and doubling its size to 200 and again, 500. So this document's pretty irrelevant at this point. We really need to come up with a different structure. At the time we had 3 studios. I'll get into how many we have now in a couple of slides. But you know, this needs a refresh. And I think that timeline of 5 years is really good for doing that because institutions change. Sorry. So last part of our SAP that I want to share is the goal setting and evaluation. And again, we went methodically through this section, asking ourselves a lot of questions and tried to figure out how every project can participate in this, no matter what size or scale. no matter what studio. And we kind of developed this baseline. Okay, all projects are going to do these things. They're going to pick 3 goals from the AIA framework for design excellence, and they're going to deal with water because we're in Arizona and water is really important and we should all be dealing with it. Any projects larger than 10,000 square feet, we're going to do the EUI and embodied carbon. Anything larger than 30,000, we're going to add post-occupancy survey. Anything with a parking lot, we're going to do at least a design for EV charging and renewables. So we sort of recognized how we could grow at scale the sustainability in a meaningful way and give people some guidance before they even start. So, now we're Grace Design Studios. We're recently awarded the 5th fastest growing firm in the country, which is wild. That's the ride I'm on right now. And so, yeah, sustainability is looking a lot different now, but our firm is targeting, right now we're 500, growing to 1,000 in the next few years. So, this latest version that I'm working on, we're really designing it for a firm of 1,000 and what that looks like. And thankfully, we've been given a little bit of insight as to what the planning is, so we can strategize accordingly. And these are our new studio practice areas. So we went from having 3 to having 11 to 12. The hospitality and entertainment kind of work independently, but they're kind of combined. So yeah, 12 different ways of working, 12 different ways of organizing, and 12 different ways of leading sustainability that we really have to sort of work on how we're going to strategize. So in most ways, we're really totally reinventing our SAP at this point, which I think is healthy. It's healthy, not just to sort of go through and update a few sentences, but really give yourself a deep dive, close look every 5 years of how you're organized. And I think that's my last slide. No, one more. This is just how many offices we have. We went from having 1 for our first SAP to 3 for the second, and now we're at 21 and growing. So that's just a little insight to how we've been working. And I do want to just note that one of the other big actions that we're taking is 2 years ago, we signed a materials pledge. And so our next version really needs to include materials in a meaningful way. So we're utilizing the new materials action plan guidance document, which was, again, just launched this summer after some work with the materials pledge working group. So both of those documents are available, and we're really going to be taking a deep dive look into materials for the first time for a lot of our firm. So, and I will pass it on to Dan. Just gonna.
Thanks, Ash.
Oh, yeah, version 3 coming soon.
And Melanie, are you going to hand me control, or do I need to initiate it here?
Yeah, I will hand you control. Love to see the materials representation. While I'm handing over to Dan, just a reminder, we'll have a material session in September, and also to use the Q&A for any questions you might have. And quick time check, we're at 1:19 East Coast time. Take it away, Dan.
Okay. All right. So at the other end of the spectrum, if your firm is not 500 going to 1,000, but instead you're more in that 50 person or less, maybe a little more range, that's my example I'm going to offer you all for the next few minutes. I've been serving as the director of sustainability at my firm since about 2010, 2011, about that time frame. And I was several years into it. I'm on a road trip with one of the principals at my firm. He said, Dan, you say you're the director of sustainability. Have you ever thought about what it is that you're directing? All right. I took that critique. I got to thinking, all right, beyond servicing lead projects and applying energy modeling in specific ways to projects when there's a need, what could we do more broadly speaking? And this was back in 2017. And this started a conversation internally that we called the High Performance Initiative, where we were thinking about how can we take this value proposition that we felt like we were applying to projects when there's a specific sustainability objective, and what if we could ramp that up and do it practice wide. And we did some research and talked to some peers and eventually arrived to the 2030 commitment and determined that being a signatory for that program would allow us to uh, basically gain access to the Design Data Exchange, the DDX. And as part of that, it prompts us to have a sustainability action plan. And I hit forward, Melanie, and I am not sure that it did anything. Okay. Try it again. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think as long as I keep clicking, it's going to keep going for me, which is, I got like 50 slides. I see several people I know on the panelists, or on the participants here. So a lot of you know I bring a lot of slides. So this resulted in the 2030 commitment. And that started a conversation about what would a sustainability action plan look like for our firm. And this is a screen clip of that first edition of the sustainability action plan that we rolled out in 2017. And this is an example of the table of contents. You can get a sense of the things that we as a smaller firm put into that document. However, full disclosure, we didn't have that AIA resource back then. There was very little guidance, and we knew we were sending this to AIA. We knew that AIA had been posting publicly other sustainability action plans, and this starts to, when you apply it to your firm, you start to think of this as a bit of marketing collateral. And so while it was sort of this guiding document, a little bit of a manifesto here about our sustainability pursuits, we also knew that this thing was going to have a big, bright light shined on it. We were sending it out to our peers, to the public, and this is something that guided our thinking in this first edition of it. So again, beautifully composed here. We used our firm's branding application here, all of our branding standards, and it's lagging a bit with me more. I'm clicking. I think I'll try that arrow down the corner. Okay, so we had some case studies, and we were already starting to track some key sustainability metrics on some of our projects, particularly lead projects. And so we were already tracking energy, already tracking water, waste diversion, and we were applying that into a database, and we were disclosing some of that in our plan. And Melanie, I might just have you drive this thing for me. So I got so many slides, and I'm just going to keep going at a fairly even clip here. So design performance modeling, we knew we were applying this to projects, and we wanted to, again, start to deploy this at scale to more than just our lead projects per se. You can do the next slide here. We did get into operational improvements. This was prompted by some of the guidance we had received from AIA. It did get us to think about internally what kind of initiatives we would do, internal processes, recycling policies, purchasing policies, what we would do externally, not project specific. Yeah, you can see here an example of going out and cleaning up streets, getting involved with local groups that are doing some of these cleanup projects, Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, some other groups like that. We would talk about our affiliations, different groups that we had membership with, either at a corporate level or some members of our team, and wanted to draw attention to that as well. This gets us to year number 1 of the process, and this is when we reported for the first time in our firm's history our work through the 2030 commitment. That was a lot. That felt like we were reporting our taxes or something. It felt like a lot of the time we had never done it before. We had since worked on a process where we ascended a learning curve, and we are down now as a small firm. This is streamlined into our process, and we can get projects in there now. It takes about a half hour to get a project in the DDX. So, but there was a little bit of a learning curve at first. We had to figure out what that meant. I offer that to you because we didn't update our sustainability action plan that first year. We focused our attention instead on the DDX. By year 2, 2019, we have the second edition. You can see still with our branding applied to it, publicly facing document. You can see the table of contents here. Doesn't look a lot different. However, if you click one time, Melanie, you'll see that we highlight and you can click again. We wanted to talk about the DDX reporting and what that process was for us, what that meant for our firm practice. And it was something that we started to have a more, we started to shift our sustainability group to more of a committee, have representation from all of our different disciplines, landscape architecture, urban planning, and we started to have these broader conversations about metrics that we're recording, and the DDX became a really important piece to that. And we wanted to draw attention to that and celebrate that and denote that in our sustainability action plan. You can see that from these clips here that the sustainability action plan isn't a heavy-handed document, at least in the early go. Melanie, you can click ahead. We get to 2020, year number 3, and you can see a very similar table of contents. You can see Tim's looking a little different there. Finally updated some of our firm stats there, but the 2018 to 2030 DDX reporting is something I was going to note here. So a lot of this for the first 3 years was just kind of like this marketing collateral, declaration of our sustainability suits, and just kind of this document that we would upkeep every year. Every spring, we would report for the DDX, and we would just kind of retool and update this document. By 2021, we click on through, we hit the pandemic. That was disruptive to us. It did prompt us to have more of a reset internally. This was about the time that AIA had published in 2021, the first edition of that document that Ashley talked about. And we spent some time reflecting on what it is that we're doing, how it is we're doing it, what our document is. That took us back to the drawing board. So things got a little messy. We picked this thing apart. We started to reflect on what it is that we're trying to do as a small practice. And we kind of went deep with it. That resource from the AIA really meant quite a bit to us in terms of a guiding document. And we eventually arrived at this point where we thought, well, we really need, we like having this external facing document, this SAP, if you will, that is out there for the public. However, we're really at the point now where we need to think about an internal resource, something that's closed door, that's on the inside, that's a bit more critical, a bit more raw, and will help us really chart what it is that we're trying to do. So this is by 2023. We have basically our SAP had matured to the point that it split into 2 documents, that external facing sustainability brochure, you could call it, and then an internal sustainability action plan. And the 2023 edition was the first version of that. You can see these look very differently. One's very raw, less manicured, and the other one is meant for the public consumption here. So if you click one time, Melanie, it'll get to that one on the left. I'll give everybody a quick glimpse into that one. You can see just kind of another iteration of that document we had already updated 3 times. Not a lot of words, not a heavy lift. Bring your marketing team involved. Melanie, you can keep clicking ahead. And this is still a very important document for us. This is that derivative of the earlier version of our SAP, and it just kind of puts out there, I think externally and internally, just kind of declares what it is we're about and how we're doing it. It also prompted us to have a sustainability landing page on our website, talking about some of our accomplishments on projects. And then for that internal facing document, this is something that we, to this day, update every year. It started off with just this framework, getting deeper into the 2030 commitment numbers, and then getting into some of our projects and personnel credentials. So Melanie, you can keep clicking into those. So we've had this thing broken up into different sections. So on the framework we talked about, you can see this is much more descriptive now. This isn't that external document for public consumption that talks about, we like to apply energy modeling to projects. No, this is like internally how it is we're going to do it, what that workflow looks like, what the tools are that we apply, what the metrics are that we're tracking. And so you can click into this one. So on that framework, we talk about it, we break it down, we provide some exhibits and discuss those tools and what you use when and how. And then for our reporting, we actually around Earth Day every year, every late spring, we'll go and actually report some of these numbers internally. We'll have a long form version of this, some stuff that I can't share on a webinar, but we do track from one year to the next what we're reporting in the DDX. So this is where that original high performance initiative is now matured into something where all that information that the DDX helps us extract and learn about our own internal processes, we can reflect that internally, understand how we're trending. We could see some market trends, certain sectors going up and down, and certain percentages of projects where we apply energy modeling and what that does to our overall portfolio performance. We learned a lot through this process. And again, this is as a small practice, and it's been a really valuable tool, taking advantage, not reinventing the wheel, taking advantage of what AI already offers. So this clip here is for our embodied carbon project and credentials. So we internally take a survey every year and make sure we net everybody in terms of their sustainability credentials. We're really proud that for a small practice based in Indianapolis, we've got a very high percentage of our staff having a green building credential. We track that 1 year to the next. And this one's more confidential. Can't share all of our client info, but we have what we call the lead list. It's LEED, it's net zero, it's sites projects, Fitwell projects. We just, for the alliteration, we call it the lead list, but it's just a growing database of key metrics and names and figures for our projects that achieve green building certification. And we celebrate that every year as well. And our marketing folks like it a lot too. Like, damn, where's the lead list? So they can just give it to them and then they can go to town with that. We also take non-project specific research that we do every year, and we'll, in our sustainability action plan report out, we'll actually talk about some of that work that we've done any given year. So we're looking a lot right now at carbon sequestration within landscapes. A couple of years ago, we were looking at transportation carbon intensity. And you can keep clicking. Every year we have kind of this extra layer of research that we do. And so 2024, we're retooling all the time, trying to refresh it. And here 2025, and the big curveball this year, just like with Ashley, it's the material pledge. We signed on and we don't know what that means yet. So we'll check back in on another webinar in a couple of years. So here's the takeaways. Again, this is really pretty closely aligned with the objectives of the course. You can screen clip this. I'm not going to go read over it because I know we're running short on some time here. We want to have time for some questions. I'm going to pass the baton over to Kate, but do make use of that creating a sustainability action plan document. It really has served us well internally as a small practice. And we've, as Ashley mentioned, we've refreshed it to have better information for smaller firms such as mine. And so I hope you'll find it a really useful document. All right, Kate, pass it over to you.
Great. Kate, do you want to attempt
you.
to screen share, or I can keep it?
I'll try. Let's try.
Okay, let's see. There is a lag, and I think whenever I move my mouse, it screws people up too. But I'll keep my mouse in the same spot. Go for it.
Okay. Well, it's already lagging. Okay. Okay. Great. So yeah, I'm going to be sharing Lake Flato's design performance action plan, and this is across our 2 locations, San Antonio and Austin. We're about 150 people, and talk a little bit about history, what it is, and how we're implementing it now, and some lessons learned. So a bit of history as well. We signed on to the 2030 commitment in 2010, so one of the early adopters for that. And so there was an action plan that was created at that time. And then in 2015, the firm did a firm-wide strategic plan and retreat. And so this was not just sustainability related, but everything, but it did have a sustainability portion to it. And so we kind of used that as our next action plan. And then when I joined the firm in 2020, that felt a bit outdated. And so I said, can we do another revision, do something a little more graphically exciting? At that point, it was just a Word document that was very simple. And for the action plan upload requirement for 2030. And so this was more of an effort to make this publicly facing and show people what we're committed to. And we had put together a small team to work on that. So it was our design performance team, about 3 of us. And then we had 2 Lake Flato partners involved who were helping review and provide feedback, which I thought was really helpful to have their insight from a top-down approach too. And then we published it in 2023. So it took us quite some time to do it. Almost 3 years before we were ready to publish. And so we made it our 2023 to 2025 plan that we are now implementing and tracking. And we'll start working on our new revision, hopefully by the end of this year. And so our plan is broken up into 3 main parts, which we call practice, people, and planet. So practice being, how do we actually approach this in our operations as Lake Flato, as a business? People is focused on how does our practice and the actual spaces that we design impact the people in the space, and then planet is anything focused on resources that we use when we're designing. So whether that's energy goals, water, site impact, etc. And within these, there are different objectives, and I won't go through all of them. You can read through our plan if you'd like, but they have each 4 different objectives. And then within that, it lists what we have as our base and our reach goals. And so I think maybe what's a bit different from our plan was we were trying to describe what do we expect from all of our projects. And so we were trying to establish what was the foundation or baseline expectation that we wanted all of our projects to have. And then we had what we call LF Reach, which is ones where, say, you did have a client who was really passionate about materials. Well, maybe then you could go for breadless free or something more high performing. And realizing that this was possibly a little bit maybe too ambitious, or, when I was fresh out of college, I had a lot of ideas around what I thought every project should do, but, we were like, let's do it. Let's see if we can do it, see how we're actually performing, and try to set the bar high and see how it goes. And so each of those objectives has these sort of base and reach goals listed. And we were trying not to reinvent the wheel when it came to figuring out what that was, but we did study all these different frameworks. They already exist. There's great frameworks out there. And so trying to pull out from those what we felt like could be foundational for our practice. But then each of the objectives, they have a little footnote that says, if you want to learn more, go ahead and read the certification and see all the details if you're interested in that. And so when it came to actually implementing this, I think this is where our action plan maybe lacks the actual action process of that. We kept it pretty simple as like, here's what we want to achieve, but it didn't get into the details of the action. I think that is what we have been trying to figure out over the past 2 to 3 years, was how do we actually feed this into our process? And so we have a pretty typical design performance process that we've implemented over the years, trying to make sure that we're integrated at every phase of the design. We focus on really early goal setting at the beginning, doing different workshops, sustainability goal setting sessions. And so it became a question of how do we implement this action plan throughout that process. And so we had a lot of different strategies that we tried, like doing a firm-wide presentation. We publish it on the website, our email signature. I'll talk about studio implementation, new hire orientation, all these different strategies, which again is not actually listed in our action plan. So I'm kind of giving you a sneak peek, but I think this will be in our new revision of kind of what we've actually been doing. So one of the things that I found right away was that no one really wanted to look at that list internally because it was a bit overwhelming. So I did the next probably more overwhelming thing, which was create an Excel spreadsheet, which isn't everyone's favorite thing. But I thought this was pretty helpful for us because I could meet with the team. I sometimes said, if you could look at this ahead of time, great. If you can't, let's meet for an hour. We'll go through all the goals, which are directly written from the action plan. And it's really just a way for them to track their progress and create action items or assign tasks. If they don't know what it is, like say how to be solar ready or all electric, there's resources and links for how to do that. So it becomes more of a tracking. This was also more qualitative at the time. So one of the things I'm realizing is that we really need to be more metric focused so that we can say like, yes, this is meeting our expectation, or no, how can we improve? And communicating the design performance efforts across the firm, we've had a pretty similar approach for a while, but our design performance team is of 5 different folks, and we have slightly different roles, but we are dedicated admin staff to this position, so we can all help organize and distribute this action plan. But one of our strategies was to have what we call studio champions. And so that's a couple of people dedicated per studio typology who would help share that information, be the typology experts. And then within each of the project teams, we say that every team should have a sustainability champion who then is the advocate, fills out the checklist, checks in with our team, and just kind of reinforces the message. So at that studio level, they also are in charge of coming up with goals for their specific studio that reinforce the action plan. They're kind of volunteer experts of their typology. And they also help create different resources. So it depends on the studio size, but it could be 2 to 4 people. And so this is an example of one of the studios. What their goal was to, out of all the different things in an action plan, just pick 3 that your studio was going to make sure that was implemented. So for example, they picked that every project should have intentional design performance goals, whether that's a workshop or using the tracking sheet. Every project should have a carbon story, so operational embodied carbon, but not necessarily metrics. It was more just like, can you talk about this qualitatively and make some progress that way? And then do an energy model. So there was a couple of things where we were like, how do we just keep checking out the box? Sometimes the groups here will do different presentations. Maybe we need to educate folks on how to do an energy model. Sometimes it's just our annual goal setting. So we're just getting together using Zoom or Miro to talk about where our goals are and how it's going. And then we'll try to do an annual studio wrap up and goal setting for the new year. So this is kind of our crazy Miro board where each of the studio's groups were in charge of writing out their goals, showing their progress, what resources did they create. And this way it fosters that cross-pollination. And I found people get really excited about this because they like to see what other studios are doing and how they can learn from each other. So this has been really fun and I think successful. And then outside of the studio, so every time we have someone new come into the firm, we have orientation that's organized around the action plan. So we just try to tell people, our team is here for you, same with the studio champions. And we have this process. There's all these different tools. We don't expect you to know this right away, but you can reach out to our team and we can help you implement these things. So we've got a whole slide deck that we do, whole hour-long presentation for new hires. And then one of the really exciting things that happened this year was Lake Flato did a whole new strategic plan as a firm. So again, not just sustainability focused, but firm-wide strategic planning. And the design performance action plan we created was referenced pretty heavily in this process because we knew that regenerative architecture, we really wanted to keep committing to this as a firm. And so they were pulling language from that and integrating it. And so I think that was really successful that now it's fully integrated in the firm as part of the things that we need to be doing in all aspects of whether it's practice or our design. When it comes to external marketing, we have a blog on our website. So you can click on the action plan. It also talks a little bit about what it was or what it is in the process. When we first launched it, we actually did an email signature, which I thought our marketing team did was fun, where you could click on the action plan. So anytime you saw our email signature, first thing you could click on it and read it, which was pretty neat. We don't have that now, but it lasted about a year. So just a bit of recap, learning from this process over the past 2 or 3 years, I think the things that have been really helpful is that studio champion group, because it kind of keeps up the momentum. We meet quarterly or more. We are setting goals and resources, and it kind of gives people motivation to be that champion in their studio. And it allows us to have really honest conversations about how we're doing too. So some of these screenshots on the right are our Miro board where we're saying, here's something cool that we did. Here's maybe where we're falling short, which was the goal around everyone doing an energy model. So it just kind of reinforces those messages. The new hire orientation, I found a lot of people are really inspired by after, and they say it's one of their favorite orientations. And we have 2 full days of orientation. So that's a win for me. And then just meeting with project teams at different phases, this gives me an excuse, like the checklist, to reach out to people and be like, hey, you haven't done this. Hey, can I talk to you? This is something we committed to. And then, being integrated in the strategic plan gives us more leverage again for me to say, we said this was a goal as a firm, so this is why I'm reaching out about it. But the things I think we didn't do so well on was tracking the projects at each phase. Hundreds of projects, it's really hard to keep track of all of them. And so that's something we need to still figure out, is making sure all projects are being evaluated. Not all of our projects are meeting those baseline goals, which I think is just the reality, but they're still doing their best. And then tracking actual quantifiable metrics is something that I really want to focus on. again, even though we had that spreadsheet, it felt more qualitative and we didn't actually collect metrics. And so now when I'm doing this final report, I'm like, how do I really say how we're doing as a firm on these different things? And one of the plans that I was pretty inspired by was BNIM's 2020 annual action plan, because I felt like they did a really nice job of summarizing their goals and actual metrics for how to do that. And so I think for us, we're trying to figure out how do we make these things more quantifiable. And so one of the things I'm looking at doing next is having a tracking system of sorts where every project needs to input. We're about maybe 40 metrics. So not the whole action plan, but just prioritizing 30 to 40 measures here. So things like, is it a previously developed site? What percent of site is vegetated? So things that you can actually quantify. So we could then say, out of the 50 active projects, how many of them are meeting this goal or what percentage? And so for us, I think this is going to be the next big thing that I really want to focus on so we can really start to quantify how we're doing. And I think that is all for me. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. We're doing really well on time. We've still got about 13 minutes left for questions. I'm going to stop sharing at the moment. So we can see everybody. I don't see any questions in the Q&A currently, but please do add some if you have a question that hasn't been answered. And I want to, looks like we've got a raised hand. 1 second. Let's just resize my screen here so I can see. Jessica, are you able to unmute or not? I think people could necessarily unmute. Okay, let's see. Got some stuff coming. Okay, got some stuff coming in on the Q&A now. Will this video recording be shared publicly? Yes, we are going to put it up on the YouTube channel for where we have our DDX sessions as well. Okay, Allison, I would like to hear from each presenter who helped with creating each plan. Okay, that's not a question. Let me jump in with one of my questions for a second. Because when we were thinking about doing the sustainability action plan, we separated it. Well, we went back and forth between, do we want to do an SAP and a materials plan in one document? Is that helpful for firms? Or is it a separate document that has separate content, but then can be cross-referenced? You guys have a sense within your firms how you approach that?
Ashley, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go. You know, the last round we went through 5 or so years ago, when we signed on to the materials pledge, one of the questions for reporting is, do you have materials in your SAP? And so I actually went back and looked, and we did, but you know, it obviously wasn't referencing the pledge specifically. So, you know, I think, in my opinion, either works, having them separate or together. I think when we get into materials, that is a broader conversation. I think a few different people are involved in the materials pledge work internally than are with the 2030. So I think having them separate is workable, because it's not necessarily the same group having those conversations, even though we'll probably end up with one document.
So I can jump in on ours. We did our first year of materials pledge reporting firm-wide. So within our practice, we have architecture, landscape architecture, and planning. We also have interiors. Materials pledge, we've handled these different initiatives by team. So the DDX reporting, some of that happens on the architecture side. Materials pledge is getting led by the interiors group. Some of the site related metrics on the site side, et cetera. And then we come together as a committee once a month we have a rep from each of the disciplines, sort of that sustainability leader by discipline. We come together as a small firm. That's a group of 4 or 5 any given meeting, and we're throughout the year constantly checking on some of these milestone things we need to produce. And the sustainability action plan is one of those things. We start to work on that in the spring, paralleling our reporting for DDX. And I anticipate that well, I know internally we're talking about what it looks like to report projects. And we're probably going to try to establish a definition of how we go about doing that and try to clarify that for the firm so that everybody knows how to address that, which also kind of addresses, I think it was Allison had a question about, I saw the phrasing there about who makes the plan. It's essentially me. I'm the one doing it every year, but there's a lot of checks over what I'm doing. So all the disciplines will weigh in with information. I've got somebody who helps me very heavily on the DDX reporting, and I check in with her regularly. But I'm the one who's ultimately sort of being the executive producer, if you will, even though I'm gathering input from a lot of people. Now that marketing piece, that external facing document, that flows in the other direction. The marketing group has that, and they come to me and they say, hey Dan, what needs to change here? And I mark up a PDF and I say, hey, supplant that with this, update this, and sending it back over to them, and we'll go back and forth. But that all goes into their process for making firm branding material. So I hope that answers both those questions quickly.
Yeah, I can speak to our plan too. I was thinking probably we would integrate the materials pledge into our design performance action plan because it is overarching and currently includes a materials section, but I have not fully thought through that. And I feel like what I'm seeing is that every time we create a document, the whole sitting on the shelf thing makes me nervous. And so I'm hesitant to create 2 separate documents and would rather have it integrated into my current process personally. And I think, yeah, that other question about who was helping work on it. I think I mentioned that briefly. Mostly I was drafting up the main document and then was getting input from various leaders in the firm.
So this kind of dovetails nicely with another question here. Advice for firms that are just getting started or playing catch up. Do you have key focus? I know, Kate, you kind of went into some of your how you started and then the metrics that you're starting to track now. But if somebody's just getting started, is there some place that has more impact than other places, or does it just depend on the firm?
Someone else want to answer that first?
I can start. I think it heavily depends on who your resources are and like who's at your firm. So if you're, if you're just getting organized around sustainability, I think it's important to include a range of people and have at least a champion at the top, who you can run things by. That was very helpful for me in our first one. I worked with one of our partners and just sort of what can we do? What can I promise sort of thing. That was really important, but also in hindsight, I had some blinders on because my home base was the healthcare studio, and I made some assumptions that different studios worked the same way we did, and it just wasn't true. So having a larger group, at least give input as you're developing the process and maybe answer some of the questions that are in the guidance document. I just really, this last time around, I found it so valuable to ask those questions with a group of people and get different answers that we could sort of combine into a firm-wide goal. Full disclosure, the last time around, I had a young one. It was COVID, my kids were home. I was very busy and I didn't have time to write it myself. So my firm allowed me to hire somebody just to help me write it and finish it and get it out the door. And it was a relatively low cost, but it was great to have somebody who could dedicate, really a couple months to working on that, to get it done. So if you don't have the time, consider something like that where you just bring in somebody who can help facilitate that one thing of writing it. We would meet weekly and go through things and how things were going, and it really helped me get it across the finish line.
And for us, I'm seeing lots of great questions here in the Q&A too, written down. Uh, for us, we had that high performance initiative. We knew that helping our clients save on energy cost, we're talking, a decade ago, that was a big part of the conversation for what started our sustainability action plan. When we decided that the 2030 commitment, the DDX was a great vehicle to do it, then our metric starts to harmonize around the things that AIA has in that system that we have to report on. But I would say for getting an SAP off the ground for medium and small firms, which I see multiple questions to that extent, it's seriously, you find a champion, maybe somebody that you could elevate as the sustainability lead or sustainability director if you don't already have one. Get a Word file, put it on OneDrive or Dropbox or something, have some other, get kind of a small committee together, a task force to just start to flesh it out. And for what we had to do internally was just put pen to pad, so to speak, digitally, send that up to the executive committee, the leadership of the firm, to make sure that we weren't over promising or anything like that and things we couldn't keep up with. Make sure you get that executive level buy-in. That is key. We could get sort of the grassroots sustainability committee together, but the magic happened when we got that executive level support to commit to the 2030 commitment, that they said, okay, and Jessica, I addressed one of your questions about how much time it takes us on the DDX and doing the SAP. I mean, it starts from the top where they say, okay, sustainability committee, how many hours do you need? And we said, we think we need 24 for the sustainability action plan. We think we need another 24 for the DDX. We need a half hour to an hour per project. Call it an hour per project. You got 50 projects internally. Okay, so you might need that, because I saw that number pop up on the stream there a while ago. But that's what we did, is we got permission to take that time and to have that overhead time recorded and tracked. And we delivered within that. Start off small. I get both inspired and overwhelmed by seeing what Ashley and Kate do with their firms. We're just a small firm in Indy. I'd say start somewhere, start small, and let it grow from there. We want to give you inspiring examples, but what I loved is, like, I'm taking notes. Some of you probably saw me like in my little notebook here as Kate's talking. And she showed BNIM some of the great stuff they're doing, Jeremy and team over there in Kansas City. And that's where we hope this exchange helps. That it's that peer-to-peer learning, peer-to-peer knowledge. Reach out to me. I know Ashley and Kate feel the same. Anything we can do to help, but it really just starts off small, start to define it, get that executive level leadership, and push it out.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think there is a mix of, it's really great to be ambitious, which I think is where we started. But what I have found with the studio groups is even just trying to do 3 goals a year is very difficult. And so I think even if you could say, like, here are all the great things we want to do, but we're only going to focus on 3 things, like energy modeling alone on every project, I found to be so challenging. And that's just like one goal, like tracking goals, one goal. And so I'm trying to step back and be like, okay, I'm going to commit to 3 things a year, help the studios do it. And that's how we're going. So trying to be realistic and small so you can be successful.
Yeah. Speaking of time and measurements, question here about measuring performance of actual projects versus internal modeling. How do you then reflect back on that? Use Energy Star? What's the mechanism?
For us, it'll vary on projects. If it's a project with energy modeling, that answers that question. Regulatory wise, to meet our energy code, we have to report certain things. We'll record that. And a lot of times it's just going to, like, one of the great free resources that Architecture 2030 has, for instance. You can get a baseline EUI, make some changes. There's some other programs. There's some plugins for Revit. Send me an email. I need to take more than 10 seconds to answer this question, but there are lots of great tools out there, including some tools by some folks on the attendees list here. So happy to have that conversation. Reach out to me.
Yeah, we do a mix of in-house training, which I think it helps to have a dedicated design performance person who can be the person who helps train and run some of these, but we do outsource a lot of work too. So trying to make sure that it's communicated to the MEP early too, and making sure it's actually in the contract, because we find that our teams assume that there's energy modeling and most of the time there's not. So very early on expectations.
So I think we'll have to end it there. We are at the hour. Want to thank everybody for joining and especially our panelists for the time you've committed to this. I'll go back and look at the questions and answer anything that didn't get answered in this webinar. Take a look at the Dropbox, which I put in the chat for examples of sustainability action plans. And then we have 2 upcoming webinars for small firms and for materials. So hope to see you then. And thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.
You.